Lee Min-jin had always believed that fame was the answer to all of life's problems. At 28 years old, he was one of South Korea's most popular actors. With millions of fans across Asia who screamed his name at every public appearance, his face appeared on billboards throughout Seoul. His dramas broke television ratings records, and brands paid him enormous sums just to hold their products for 30 seconds in commercials. The morning that would change everything started like any other day in Min-jin's carefully orchestrated life. He woke up in his luxury penthouse apartment in Gangnam, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view of the Han River. His personal assistant, Soo-jin, had already arranged his breakfast, selected his outfit, and prepared his schedule for what promised to be another successful day in the spotlight. Min-jun's latest drama, Hearts in the Palace, had just finished airing its final episode the night before. The show had been a massive hit, drawing over 20% of the national television audience and sparking countless online discussions about the romantic storyline between his character, a modern-day prince, and a humble palace guard. Fans had fallen in love with his portrayal of nobility and honor, praising his ability to show both strength and sensitivity as he prepared for his morning schedule. Min-jin felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came with being at the top of his profession. Today's events included a press conference about his next project, a photo shoot for a luxury fashion magazine, and a charity appearance that would help maintain his image as someone who cared about important social causes. The press conference was scheduled to take place at one of Seoul's most prestigious hotels. Min-jin arrived in his black Mercedes, followed by a convoy of security vehicles and staff cars. Dozens of reporters and photographers had gathered outside the hotel entrance, their cameras flashing constantly as they tried to capture the perfect shot of the beloved actor. Inside the hotel's grand ballroom, hundreds of journalists sat waiting, with their notebooks and recording devices ready. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Min-jin's publicist had promised that he would announce details about his upcoming international project, a collaboration with a major Hollywood studio that would make him the first Korean actor to headline a big-budget American action film. Min-jin took the stage looking absolutely perfect, as always. His hair was styled flawlessly, his designer suit fit him like it had been crafted specifically for his body, and his smile radiated the kind of confidence that had made him a star. The audience of reporters immediately began taking photos, their camera flashes creating a constant strobe effect that Min-jin had long ago learned to ignore. The first part of the press conference went exactly as planned. Min-jin announced his Hollywood deal with just the right amount of humble excitement, spoke about his gratitude to his fans for their support, and shared his hopes for representing Korean culture on the global stage. The reporters asked predictable questions about his preparation for the role, his feelings about working with American directors, and his plans for the future. But then something unexpected happened. A young reporter from a smaller entertainment blog raised her hand and asked a question that caught Min-jin completely off guard. She asked him about his recent visit to a children's hospital, specifically about an incident that had been captured on security cameras but not yet made public. Min-jin felt his stomach drop, though his expression remained perfectly composed. He knew exactly what incident she was referring to, and he had hoped that it would never become public knowledge. 3 weeks earlier, during what was supposed to be a routine charity visit to bring joy to sick children, something had gone wrong. Reporter continued speaking, her voice calm but persistent. She explained that she had obtained footage showing Min-jin's reaction when a young patient, a 7-year-old boy named Taeho who was battling leukemia, had accidentally spilled juice on Min-jin's expensive white shirt during their photo session. The security footage showed Min-jun's immediate response, a flash of genuine anger and disgust that he had quickly tried to hide. The room fell silent as everyone waited for Min-jun's response. He could feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Despite the air conditioning, his publicist was making frantic gestures from the side of the stage, trying to signal that they should end the press conference immediately. But Min-jin knew he had to say something. He cleared his throat and attempted his most charming smile, the one that had won over millions of fans and convinced directors to cast him in their most important projects. Min-jin explained that charity work was very important to him, and that he had genuinely enjoyed meeting all the children at the hospital. He suggested that any footage the reporter might have seen had been taken out of context. But the reporter wasn't finished. She pressed further, asking why Min-jun had left the hospital so abruptly after the incident, cutting short his scheduled 2-hour visit to just 30 minutes. She mentioned that several nurses and hospital staff had witnessed him complaining loudly about his ruined shirt and demanding that his assistant find him a replacement immediately. The questions kept coming from other journalists who now sensed a real story developing. They asked about his attitude toward his fans, his commitment to charitable causes, and whether his public image matched his private behavior. Min-jun tried to maintain his composure, but he could feel his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the pressure. His answers became shorter and more defensive. He insisted that he was being misrepresented, that he cared deeply about sick children, and that anyone who suggested otherwise was spreading malicious rumors. But his tone was growing sharper, and the charming smile was becoming more forced. With each passing minute, the breaking point came when another reporter asked him directly whether he thought his behavior at the hospital had been appropriate. Given that he was supposed to be a role model for young people, Min-chen's famous temper, which his management team had worked so hard to keep hidden from the public, finally exploded. He snapped at the reporter, his voice rising as he demanded to know why they were focusing on negative stories, instead of celebrating his achievements and charitable contributions. Min-jun pointed out all the good work he had done over the years, the money he had donated to various causes, and the inspiration he had provided to countless fans around the world. The room erupted as photographers captured every moment of Min-chun's outburst. His publicist rushed onto the stage and quickly escorted him away from the microphones, but the damage was already done. Within minutes, video clips of his angry response were being uploaded to social media platforms and shared across the internet. As Min-jun sat in his car afterward, driving away from the hotel in stunned silence, he had no idea that this press conference would mark the beginning of the biggest crisis of his career. The incident at the children's hospital was about to become public knowledge, and his reaction to the questions would only make everything worse. Within hours of the press conference, Min-chun's world began to crumble in ways he had never imagined possible. The security footage from the children's hospital had been leaked online, and millions of people were watching the moment that would destroy his carefully crafted reputation. The video showed everything in painful detail: the innocent child accidentally spilling juice, Min-chun's immediate look of disgust and anger, and his harsh words to the hospital staff. The footage was particularly damaging because it contrasted so sharply with Min-chun's public image. For years, he had been marketed as the perfect boyfriend material, kind, gentle, and caring toward everyone he met. His dramas always featured him as noble characters who would sacrifice anything for others. But the hospital video showed a different side of his personality that fans had never seen before. Social media exploded with reactions that ranged from disappointment to outright fury. Fans who had defended him for years posted long messages, expressing their heartbreak at discovering who he really was behind the cameras. Many shared screenshots comparing his charitable social media posts with the reality of his behavior at the hospital, highlighting what they saw as his hypocrisy. The hashtag apology or excuse began trending across multiple platforms as people debated whether Min-chun's eventual response would be genuine remorse or just another calculated public relations move. Former fans posted photos of themselves throwing away his merchandise, deleting his photos from their phones, and canceling their subscriptions to streaming services that featured his dramas. Min-jun spent the first day after the press conference locked in his apartment, watching his reputation crumble in real time. His phone buzzed constantly with calls from his management team, but he ignored them all. He sat on his expensive leather couch, scrolling through endless negative comments and feeling a kind of panic he had never experienced before. The criticism wasn't just coming from random internet users. Respected entertainment journalists were writing detailed articles, analyzing his behavior and questioning whether he deserved the massive influence he had over young people. Medical professionals who worked with sick children published open letters expressing their disappointment in his lack of empathy and professionalism. What hurt Min-jun most were the comments from parents of hospitalized children. How their kids had been excited to meet their favorite actor, only to witness his selfish behavior when things didn't go perfectly. One mother shared that her daughter, who had been fighting cancer, had cried for hours after seeing how Min-jun reacted to the spilled juice, feeling responsible for making him angry. The business consequences began almost immediately. 3 major brands announced they were ending their endorsement deals with Min-jin, citing concerns about his public image and values alignment. Luxury fashion magazine postponed his scheduled photo shoot indefinitely. The Hollywood studio began quietly exploring options to replace him in their upcoming international film. Min-chen's management company called an emergency meeting but he refused to attend. His longtime manager, Park Hyun-woo, came to his apartment personally, using his spare key to enter. When Min-jun wouldn't answer the door, he found the actor sitting in the dark, still in the same clothes he had worn to the press conference 2 days earlier. Park Hyun-woo had been managing celebrities for over 20 years. He had seen stars survive various scandals through careful crisis management and strategic public relations campaigns. But he had rarely seen a situation deteriorate so quickly or completely as Min-jun's current predicament. The combination of documented bad behavior and an explosive public reaction created a perfect storm that would be difficult to weather. The manager tried to convince Min-jun to take immediate action. He suggested a carefully crafted public apology, a substantial donation to children's hospitals, and a series of genuine volunteer activities that could demonstrate real change. But Min-jun was resistant to the idea that he needed to apologize for anything, insisting that the whole situation had been blown out of proportion. During their conversation, Min-jun revealed the depth of his disconnect from reality. He complained that people were being too sensitive, that celebrities shouldn't be expected to be perfect all the time, and that his charitable contributions over the years should count for something. He seemed genuinely confused about why one moment of honest reaction should overshadow years of public service and entertainment. Park Hyun-woo realized that Min-jun's problems went deeper than just a public relations crisis. The actor had become so insulated by fame and wealth that he had lost touch with normal human emotions and social expectations. He had been surrounded by people who told him what he wanted to hear for so long that he couldn't understand why anyone would criticize his behavior. The manager tried a different approach, showing Min-jun some of the more thoughtful criticism that had been posted online. He read comments from fans who explained how much Min-jun's characters had meant to them, how betrayed they felt discovering that his real personality was so different from his on-screen persona. Some people wrote about how they had looked up to him as a role model and felt foolish for believing in his carefully constructed image. But instead of feeling remorse, Min-jun became angry at his critics. He accused them of being unrealistic in their expectations and ungrateful for all the entertainment he had provided over the years. He argued that he was just a human being who had been caught in an unfortunate moment, that people should be more understanding of the pressures he faced as a public figure. As the days passed, the story continued to grow and evolve. Investigative journalists began looking into Min-jun's past behavior, interviewing former co-workers, crew members, and staff from various events. More stories emerged about his difficult personality, his demands for special treatment, and his dismissive attitude toward people he considered beneath his status. One particularly damaging story came from a makeup artist who had worked with Min-jun on multiple projects. She described how he had berated her for minor mistakes, refused to acknowledge her presence unless he needed something, complained constantly about the working conditions that everyone else accepted without issue. Her account was supported by several other crew members who had similar experiences. The entertainment industry, which had always protected Min-jun because of his commercial value, began to distance itself from him. Directors who had previously competed to work with him started making public statements about the importance of treating all cast and crew members with respect. Some of his former co-stars posted subtle social media messages about kindness and humility that were clearly directed at the controversy. Min-jun's fan clubs, which had once been among the most organized and passionate in the Korean entertainment industry, began disbanding or redirecting their energy toward other actors. The presidents of several major fan organizations published joint statements, expressing their disappointment and announcing that they could no longer support someone whose private behavior contradicted everything they had believed about him. Most painful blow came from the children's hospital itself. The medical director held a press conference to discuss the incident, explaining how Min Chun's behavior had affected both the young patients and the staff members who had worked so hard to organize his visit. She emphasized that the children had been excited for weeks about meeting their favorite actor, and that his reaction to a simple accident had left many of them feeling confused and sad. The director also revealed that Min Chun's team had initially tried to prevent the hospital from discussing the incident publicly, offering a large donation in exchange for their silence. This revelation made the situation even worse, as it suggested that Min Chun was more concerned with protecting his image than with taking responsibility for his actions or making amends to the children he had hurt. By the end of the first week, Min Chun's crisis had evolved beyond a simple celebrity scandal into a national conversation about privilege, accountability, and the responsibility that comes with public influence. Korean news programs dedicated entire segments to analyzing the incident, with child psychologists, ethics professors, and social commentators weighing in on what his behavior revealed about celebrity culture and societal values. The story had also spread internationally, with entertainment outlets in Japan, China, and Southeast Asia picking up the coverage. Min Chun's global fan base, which had been one of his greatest professional assets, was now contributing to his downfall as millions of international fans expressed their disappointment and anger across multiple languages and platforms. What made the situation particularly explosive is how it connected to broader social issues that were already causing tension in Korean society. Many people saw Min Chun's behavior as representative of the growing gap between the wealthy elite and ordinary citizens. His reaction to a sick child's accident became a symbol of how disconnected some celebrities had become from the struggles and sensitivities of regular people. Min Chun finally agreed to meet with his full management team after his mother called him in tears. Having seen the coverage on the evening news, she begged him to do something to repair the damage, not just for his career, but for their family's reputation. His younger sister, who worked as a teacher, told him that her students were asking her difficult questions about her famous brother's behavior. The emergency strategy meeting took place in the conference room of his management company's office building. Present were his manager Park Hyun-woo, his publicist, his legal advisor, and the company's crisis management specialist. They had prepared a comprehensive plan to address the situation, but they needed Min Chun's cooperation to implement it successfully. Crisis specialist, a woman named Kim Ji-soo, who had handled scandals for some of Korea's biggest stars, laid out the harsh reality of Min Chun's situation. She explained that this wasn't just about one incident at a hospital. It had become a referendum on his entire character and career. The public was no longer just angry about his behavior. They were questioning whether they had been deceived about who he really was for years. Kim Ji-soo presented polling data showing that Hume's approval rating had dropped from over 80% to less than 15% in just 1 week. More importantly, the demographic breakdown showed that he had lost support across all age groups, including the core fan base of young women who had been his most reliable supporters. The damage was so extensive that traditional damage control measures might not be sufficient. The team proposed a multi-phase rehabilitation strategy that would require Min Chun to make significant changes to his lifestyle and public persona. The first phase involved a comprehensive public apology that acknowledged his wrongdoing without making excuses or shifting blame. The second phase required him to step away from public appearances for several months while engaging in genuine charitable work, particularly with children's hospitals and organizations. The third phase involved gradually returning to public life, with a much more humble and service-oriented approach. Instead of focusing on glamorous projects and luxury endorsements, Min Chun would need to choose roles and opportunities that demonstrated personal growth and social consciousness. The entire process would take at least 2 years and might not ultimately succeed in restoring his career. Min Chun listened to the presentation with growing frustration and resistance. He interrupted several times to argue that the proposed strategy was too extreme and would essentially end his career as a top-tier celebrity. He complained that other actors had survived worse scandals without having to completely reinvent themselves, and he questioned why he should have to accept such a dramatic reduction in his status and earning potential. His legal advisor tried to explain that the current situation was different from typical celebrity scandals because it involved children and revealed character flaws rather than just poor judgment or personal mistakes. The public's reaction suggested that people felt personally betrayed by discovering that someone they had admired and supported was not who they thought he was. The publicist showed Minjun examples of social media posts from former fans who were expressing their disappointment in very personal terms. Many people wrote about how his characters in various dramas had helped them through difficult times, and how devastated they felt learning that the real person behind those characters was so different from what they had imagined. One particularly powerful post came from a teenage girl who had been battling depression. She wrote about how Min Chen's drama hearts in the palace had given her hope during her darkest moments, and how his character's kindness and nobility had inspired her to keep fighting. Learning about his true behavior had not only destroyed her faith in him, but it also made her question whether any of the positive messages she had taken from his work were genuine. Kim To emphasized that this emotional betrayal was why traditional celebrity apology strategies wouldn't work in Minchun's case. People weren't just angry about one incident, they were grieving the loss of someone they had believed in. Any attempt to minimize his behavior or return quickly to business as usual would be seen as proof that he didn't understand the depth of the harm he had caused. The meeting grew heated when Minjun refused to accept responsibility for his fans' emotional reactions. He argued that people who built their entire emotional well-being around a celebrity were being unrealistic, and that he shouldn't be held responsible for their personal problems. He insisted that his job was to entertain people, not to be a perfect role model for their personal lives. This response alarmed his management team, who realized that Min Chen's problems went beyond just bad publicity. His complete inability to empathize with his fans or understand their perspective suggested a fundamental disconnect from normal human emotions that would make any rehabilitation strategy difficult to implement. Park Hyun-woo tried a more direct approach, showing Min-jin the financial consequences of his situation. The canceled endorsement deals had cost him over 2 billion won in immediate income. The postponement of his Hollywood project had eliminated what would have been his biggest payday ever. Several television networks had quietly removed his dramas from their streaming platforms, reducing his residual income significantly. More importantly, the damage to his reputation was affecting his family and everyone associated with him. His management company was losing other clients who didn't want to be associated with the controversy. His former co-stars were being asked about him in interviews, forcing them to navigate difficult questions about their experiences working with him. The breaking point in the meeting came when Kim Ji-soo showed Min-jun a video message from Taeho. The 7-year-old boy who spilled juice had started the entire controversy. The child's mother had allowed him to record a simple message saying that he was sorry for making the actor angry and that he hoped Min-jun would still be able to make good movies for other kids to enjoy. The innocence and genuine concern in the child's voice created a moment of uncomfortable silence in the conference room. Here was a 7-year-old apologizing to a wealthy adult for an accident. While that adult had spent a week complaining about being treated unfairly by the media and the public, Min-chun's reaction to the video would determine everything that followed. His management team watched his face carefully, hoping to see some sign of genuine remorse or emotional breakthrough that would indicate he was capable of the kind of personal growth that his rehabilitation would require. But instead of showing empathy or regret, Min-jun became defensive and angry. He accused his team of manipulating him with emotional tactics and complained that showing him the video was unfair. He argued that the child's parents were exploiting their son's illness to make Min-jun look bad, and that the whole situation was being blown out of proportion by people with their own agendas. Min-chun's callous reaction to the child's video message was the final straw for his management team. Kim Ji-soo, who had successfully rehabilitated the careers of numerous celebrities over the years, made the unprecedented decision to terminate her company's relationship with Min-jun. She explained that successful crisis management required genuine remorse and a willingness to change, neither of which he had demonstrated. Park Hyun-woo, despite their long professional relationship, also began considering whether he could continue representing someone whose values were so fundamentally at odds with his own. He had built his reputation on helping talented people navigate the challenges of fame while maintaining their humanity. But Min-jin seemed to have lost touch with basic human decency. The news of his management team's internal conflicts leaked to the entertainment press within days, adding another layer to Min-seon's growing crisis. Industry insiders began speaking anonymously about his difficult personality and professional behavior, painting a picture of someone who had become increasingly isolated and entitled over the years. Meanwhile, the public's attention had shifted from anger to a more complex mixture of disappointment and fascination with Min-jin's psychology. Mental health professionals began appearing on talk shows to discuss how extreme privilege and constant adulation could warp someone's ability to relate to others. His case became a study in how fame without accountability could create moral blindness. The Children's Hospital, where the original incident occurred, announced that they were establishing a new program to train celebrities and public figures on appropriate behavior during charity visits. They partnered with child psychology experts to create guidelines that would help prevent similar situations in the future. The program was named the Taeho Initiative, after the young patient whose experience had sparked a national conversation. This development was particularly painful for Min-jin because it meant his worst moment was being turned into something positive that would outlast his career. Every future celebrity who participated in the program would be reminded of his failure and taught how to do better. His legacy was becoming a cautionary tale rather than the inspirational success story he had always imagined. Desperate to regain control of his narrative, Min-jin decided to give an exclusive interview to a major television network without consulting his remaining advisors. He believed that if he could just explain his side of the story properly, people would understand that he wasn't really a bad person and that the whole situation had been misunderstood. The interview was scheduled for prime time and heavily promoted as Min-jun's first public response to the controversy. Millions of people tuned in, many hoping to see genuine remorse and accountability, while others were curious to see how he would try to defend his behavior. The stakes couldn't have been higher for his career and reputation. The interviewer, veteran journalist Choi Min-soo, was known for his tough but fair questioning style. He had conducted career-defining interviews with politicians, business leaders, and celebrities for over 2 decades. He began the interview by giving Min-jin an opportunity to address his behavior at the Children's Hospital directly. Min-jin's response immediately revealed that he still didn't understand the gravity of his situation, instead of taking full responsibility. He began by explaining how stressful his life had become and how difficult it was to maintain perfect behavior at all times. He described his busy schedule, the constant pressure from fans and media, and the unrealistic expectations that came with being a public figure. While these factors might have generated some sympathy if presented as context rather than excuses, Min-jin used them to justify his reaction to the spilled juice. He explained that he had been wearing an expensive designer shirt and was worried about the upcoming photo shoot, making his frustration understandable under the circumstances. Min-soo pressed him about the impact his behavior had on the child and other young patients who witnessed the incident. Min-jun's response showed his continued inability to empathize with others' experiences. He suggested that children needed to learn that actions have consequences and that his honest reaction might have been educational for them. The interview took a disastrous turn when Choi Min-soo asked Min-jin about the video message from Taeho, apologizing for the accident. Instead of expressing regret for how his behavior had affected the child, Min-jin complained that showing the video publicly was manipulative and unfair to him. He suggested that the child's parents were using their son's illness to gain sympathy and attention. Viewers watching the interview were horrified by Min-jun's complete lack of empathy, his willingness to attack a sick child and his family rather than take responsibility for his own actions. Social media exploded with even more intense criticism than before, many people saying they had held out hope that he might show genuine remorse until they saw the interview. The most damaging moment came when Choi Min-soo asked Min-jin directly whether he felt any regret about his behavior. Min-jin paused for a long moment before saying that He regretted how the situation had been portrayed in the media. But he didn't regret being human and having normal emotional reactions to unexpected situations. This response crystallized everything that was wrong with Min Chen's mindset. He was expressing regret about the consequences he faced rather than the harm he had caused others. He was framing his selfish behavior as normal and healthy, rather than recognizing it as a failure of character and empathy. The interview concluded, with Choi Min-soo giving Min Jen one final opportunity to speak directly to his fans and to Taeho's family. Instead of offering a genuine apology, Min Jen used the moment to ask his fans to continue supporting him and to remember all the positive entertainment he had provided over the years. He made no mention of Taeho or his family at all. Within hours of the interview's broadcast, the reaction was swift and brutal. Entertainment industry professionals who had remained neutral during the initial controversy began speaking out against Min Chun's attitude and behavior. Several of his former co-stars issued statements, distancing themselves from him and expressing support for the Children's Hospital, and Taeho's family. Major television networks announced that they were removing Min Chan's dramas from their programming schedules and canceling reruns that had been planned for the following months. Streaming platforms followed suit, making his extensive body of work suddenly unavailable to viewers who might want to revisit it. The international entertainment industry also began closing doors that had previously been open to Min Jen. The Hollywood studio formally announced that they were recasting his role in their upcoming film, citing creative differences. Other international projects that had been in development were quietly canceled or moved forward with different actors. Most significantly, several major talent agencies issued internal memos advising their clients not to work with Min Jen on Min Jen future projects. While these memos weren't made public, their existence quickly became known throughout the industry, effectively blacklisting him from major productions. The Korea Broadcasting System announced that they were conducting a review of their celebrity appearance guidelines in response to Min Soon's case. They emphasized the importance of character and social responsibility in addition to talent when selecting people to represent their programs and networks. Min Chen's few remaining supporters began abandoning him after the interview. Fan club presidents, who had tried to defend him during the initial controversy, post-haft apologies for their misplaced loyalty and announced that they were disbanding their organizations. International fan sites shut down. Merchandise sellers stopped carrying his products. The actor found himself more isolated than he had ever been in his adult life. His phone stopped ringing with offers and opportunities. His social media accounts lost hundreds of thousands of followers daily. Most painfully, people he had considered friends in the industry began avoiding his calls and declining invitations to meet. But perhaps the most devastating consequence was the realization that his behavior had caused real harm to vulnerable children who had looked up to him. Reports emerged from child psychologists about the impact his attitude was having on young patients in hospitals across the country, many of whom had seen him as a source of hope and inspiration. The weeks following the disastrous television interview marked the lowest point in Min Chen's life. His luxury penthouse, once a symbol of his success, had become a prison where he spent his days scrolling through endless negative coverage and watching his career disappear piece by piece. His bank accounts, while still substantial, were no longer being replenished by the steady stream of endorsements and acting fees he had taken for granted. The isolation was crushing for someone who had spent over a decade being constantly surrounded by assistants, managers, co-workers, and adoring fans. Min Jen found himself alone for the first time since becoming famous, with nothing but his thoughts and the growing realization that he had destroyed everything he had worked to build. His family relationships, which had already been strained by his demanding career and growing ego, reached a breaking point. His mother stopped taking his calls after reporters began showing up at her home asking for comments about his behavior. His sister changed her phone number and asked him not to contact her until the controversy died down, fearing that their association was affecting her. Students and colleagues, the financial consequences were becoming more serious than Min Jen had initially realized. Beyond the canceled endorsement deals and lost projects, He was facing potential legal issues from contracts he could no longer fulfill. Several brands were threatening to sue him for damages related to their association with his tarnished reputation. His accountant informed him that maintaining his current lifestyle would be impossible without new income sources. The penthouse, rent car payments, and staff salaries that had seemed insignificant when he was earning millions per month were now major financial burdens. For the first time in his adult life, Minjeon had to consider the possibility of downsizing his life dramatically, but the most painful consequence was the growing awareness of how his behavior had affected others, particularly children who had looked up to him. Child advocacy groups began sharing stories from young patients in hospitals around the country who had been following the controversy and feeling confused about why their favorite actors seemed so different from his characters. One particularly heartbreaking account came from a 9-year-old girl, the chronic illness, who had written a letter to Minjeon asking why he had been mean to the little boy in the hospital. Her mother shared the letter on social media, explaining that her daughter had been inspired by Minjeon's character in Hearts in the Palace to stay brave during her treatments, but now felt betrayed and confused. These stories began to penetrate Minjeon's defensive barriers in a way that criticism from adults had not. He found himself thinking about the children who had believed in him and feeling something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine shame. The realization that he had hurt kids who were already suffering was more painful than any damage to his career or bank account. Late one night, unable to sleep and overwhelmed by guilt, Minjeon made an impulsive decision that would begin to change everything. He drove to the children's hospital where the original incident had occurred, not for a publicity stunt or photo opportunity, simply because he needed to see the place where his life had begun to unravel. The hospital was quiet. In the early morning hours, with only essential staff working the night shift, Minjeon sat in his car in the parking lot, staring at the building and trying to understand how he had become someone who could be cruel to sick children. He remembered his younger self, before fame and wealth had changed him, and wondered when he had lost the capacity for basic human kindness. A security guard eventually approached his car and asked if he needed help. When he recognized Minjeon, his expression immediately turned cold. The guard explained that the actor wasn't welcome on hospital property and asked him to leave. The rejection stung, but Minjeon realized it was entirely justified given his past behavior. As he drove home, Minjeon made a decision that surprised even him. He called his former manager Park Hyun-woo, waking him up at 3 in the morning, and asked for help, not with managing his career, but with finding a way to make amends for the harm he had caused. It was the first time in months that he had asked for something other than damage control or image rehabilitation. Park Hyun-woo was initially skeptical, having seen Minjeon's previous attempts at taking responsibility fail spectacularly, but something in the actor's voice suggested that this conversation was different. Minjeon wasn't asking how to fix his career or restore his reputation. He was asking how to help the children he had hurt. The manager agreed to meet with Minjeon later that week, but only if he was genuinely committed to making changes that went far beyond public relations strategies. He emphasized that any attempt to help would need to be private and sustained, without media coverage or publicity benefits. Minjeon would need to prove his sincerity through actions rather than words. When they met, Park Hyun-woo was struck by how different Minjeon looked and sounded. A perfectly styled appearance and confident dem. 2 years after the hospital incident that destroyed his career, Minjeon had become a completely different person. He lived in a modest apartment, worked as a regular volunteer at 3 different children's hospitals, and had established one of the most respected pediatric support foundations in South Korea. His foundation had funded new medical equipment, family support programs, and recreational activities for thousands of young patients and their families. The public had largely forgotten about Minjeon's entertainment career, and he preferred it that way. His days were filled with meaningful work rather than photo shoots and promotional events. He helped families navigate the medical system, organized activities for patients, provided emotional support during some of their most difficult moments. The work was harder than acting had ever been. It was also infinitely more rewarding. Dr. Kim Soo-jin, the director of pediatric oncology at Seoul Children's Hospital, had initially been skeptical when Minjun first approached them about volunteering. She had seen too many celebrities use charitable work as publicity opportunities, showing up for photo sessions but disappearing when real help was needed. But Min Chen's consistent presence and genuine dedication had gradually earned her trust and respect. Minjun had developed special relationships with several long-term patients who didn't even know about his former fame. To them, he was just Uncle Minjun, the volunteer who helped with their homework, played games during treatment sessions, and listened to their fears and dreams. These children saw him as someone who cared about them as individuals, not as photo opportunities or stepping stones to better publicity. One of these relationships was with 8-year-old Houn, a bright girl battling a rare form of childhood cancer. She had been receiving treatment for over a year, and Minjun had been part of her support team for most of that time. Houn loved to draw and had created dozens of pictures for Minjun, who treasured each one more than any award he had received. During his acting career, the transformation in Minchun's character became most evident during a crisis that tested everything he had learned about himself over the past 2 years. Houn's condition took a serious turn for the worse, and her doctors informed her family that her treatment options were becoming limited. The little girl was scared and confused, and her parents were devastated. Minjun spent hours sitting with Houn and her family, offering comfort and support without trying to minimize their pain or offer false hope. He helped them navigate the complex medical decisions they faced and connected them with other families who had walked similar paths. His presence provided stability and strength during one of the most terrifying times in their lives. During this period, a junior reporter from an entertainment blog recognized Minjun at the hospital and began investigating his volunteer work. The reporter discovered the extent of his charitable activities, his foundation's impact, and the genuine relationships he had built with patients and families. She prepared an article about his transformation, planning to present it as a redemption story. But when the reporter approached Minjun for an interview, his response revealed how completely he had changed. Instead of seeing the article as an opportunity to rehabilitate his public image, he was concerned about protecting the privacy and dignity of the children and families he worked with. He asked the reporter not to publish the story, explaining that publicity could harm the people he was trying to help. Minjun's main concern was that media attention would turn his volunteer work into a spectacle, potentially disrupting the healing environment that hospitals worked so hard to maintain. He had seen how his previous fame had affected every situation he entered, and he didn't want his past to interfere with the important work being done by medical professionals and other volunteers. The reporter was intrigued by Minchun's selfless response and decided to spend more time observing his work before making any decisions about the article. She watched him interact with patients and families, attended foundation meetings, and interviewed medical staff who worked with him regularly. What she discovered challenged everything she thought she knew about celebrity redemption stories. Medical professionals consistently described Minjun as reliable, humble, and genuinely committed to helping others. They noted that he never sought recognition for his work and often went out of his way to ensure that credit went to the medical staff and other volunteers who deserved it. His foundation operated transparently and efficiently, with very low administrative costs and maximum impact on patient care. Most surprisingly, many of the children and families Minjun worked with had no idea about his former career as an entertainer. To them, he was simply someone who cared about their well-being and showed up consistently to offer support. This anonymity had allowed him to build authentic relationships based on genuine care rather than celebrity status, the reporter realized. That publishing her story could destroy everything positive that Minjun had built over the past 2 years. Media attention would inevitably lead to scrutiny, debate about whether his transformation was genuine, and disruption of the healing environment he had worked so hard to protect. She faced a difficult decision about whether exposing his redemption was worth the potential harm it could cause. After much consideration, the reporter decided to approach the story differently. Instead of focusing on Minchun's personal journey, she wrote about the innovative programs and support systems that had been developed at children's hospitals across Seoul, She highlighted the impact of volunteer programs and charitable foundations. Without mentioning Minchen's involvement or past career, the article drew positive attention to the important work being done in pediatric care and resulted in increased support for children's hospitals throughout the country. Minchen's foundation received several large donations from readers who were inspired by the story. The donors never knew about his connection to the work they were supporting, Hoon's health. Battle reached a critical point during this time, requiring an experimental treatment that was extremely expensive and not covered by insurance. Minjun quietly arranged for his foundation to cover all the costs, working through the hospital's financial assistance program to ensure the family never knew the source of the help. The treatment was successful, and Haween began to recover gradually. During her long hospital stay, she continued to draw pictures for Minjen, including one that showed the two of them holding hands in a garden full of flowers. She wrote, "Thank you for being my friend," at the bottom of the drawing. Words that meant more to Minjun than any review or fan letter he had ever received. As Hyun's health improved and she was finally able to go home, Minjun realized that he had found his true calling. The work he was doing with sick children and their families provided a sense of purpose and fulfillment that his entertainment career had never offered. He had discovered that real success wasn't measured by fame or wealth, but by the positive impact you could have on other people's lives. 3 years after his fall from grace, Minjun received an unexpected invitation. The Korea Pediatric Association wanted to honor him with their annual humanitarian award for his foundation's contributions to children's health care. The ceremony would be private, attended only by medical professionals and healthcare advocates. With no media coverage or public attention, Minjun accepted the award on behalf of all the volunteers and donors who had made his foundation's work possible. In his brief speech, he talked about the children and families who had taught him what truly mattered in life. He mentioned Hyun and other patients who had shown him courage, hope, and unconditional love during their most difficult times. The audience of doctors, nurses, and healthcare workers gave Minjun a standing ovation, not because of his former celebrity status, but because of his genuine commitment to serving others. They had witnessed his transformation firsthand and respected the man he had become through years of quiet, consistent service. That night, Minjun returned to his modest apartment and looked at the humanitarian award sitting on his simple desk next to dozens of drawings from the children he had helped. He realized that this was the recognition that truly mattered, acknowledgement from people who understood the value of compassion and service over fame and fortune. The next morning, Minjun returned to the hospital for his regular volunteer shift. Ready to spend another day helping children and families navigate their medical journeys, he had learned that true redemption wasn't about public forgiveness or career restoration. It was about becoming the person you were meant to be and using your experiences, both good and bad, to make the world a little better for others. His transformation was complete, not because he had been forgiven by the public, but because he had learned to forgive himself while dedicating his life to something greater than personal success. The arrogant celebrity who had once been cruel to a sick child was gone, replaced by a humble servant who understood that the greatest privilege in life was the opportunity to help others heal.